There's a currency war happening right now. Not the kind with dramatic announcements or market crashes. Not a battle over exchange rates or competitive devaluations. This is a structural war over who controls the infrastructure of global finance. On one side, the United States and its Western allies defending the dollar-based system that has governed international payments, reserves, and capital flows for 80 years. On the other, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, plus their expanding membership, building alternative financial infrastructure designed to operate outside Western control. This is not about replacing the dollar as the world's reserve currency. That framing misses the point. This is about reducing dependence on dollar rails, about creating optionality so countries can trade, settle, and finance without needing permission from Western institutions, about ensuring that access to the global financial system cannot be weaponized for political purposes. The conflict is quiet, technical, and almost invisible to most people, but it is reshaping the architecture of global finance. And in 2026, it is accelerating. This is the money timeline. Today, we're going to examine the hidden currency war between BRICS and the West. We'll look at why it started, how BRICS are building alternatives, who is driving the effort, what the West is doing to defend the dollar system, and why financial infrastructure has become the most important battlefield in geopolitics. The hidden currency war is not about which currency people prefer for savings or transactions. It is about who controls the systems that make international finance possible. When a company in Brazil wants to pay a supplier in India, that payment does not travel directly. It moves through a network of correspondent banks, clearinghouses, and settlement systems. Most of these systems are denominated in dollars and governed by Western institutions. SWIFT, the messaging network that coordinates international payments, is based in Belgium, but operates under Western regulatory oversight. The primary reserve currencies are held in accounts at Western central banks. The rules for cross-border finance are written by Western-dominated bodies. This architecture was built in the post-World War II era, when the United States and Europe controlled the majority of global GDP and trade. It worked because most international commerce involved Western countries or flowed through Western financial hubs. The dollar became the default because it was stable, liquid, and backed by the world's largest economy. But that system now operates as a choke point. If a country loses access to dollar clearing, it cannot easily participate in international trade. If its reserves are frozen, it loses financial sovereignty. If SWIFT access is cut, payments become extremely difficult. The infrastructure that enables global finance can also disable it. BRICS countries are not trying to destroy this system in a dramatic collapse. They are building parallel infrastructure that allows them to bypass it when necessary. The goal is optionality, the ability to function even if access to Western financial systems is restricted or denied. This is fundamentally different from past currency competition. When the euro launched, it competed with the dollar for reserve status and transaction volume. The yuan internationalization effort aimed to increase the use of Chinese currency in global trade. Those were currency strategies. The BRICS approach is an infrastructure strategy. Build alternative payment rails. Create local currency settlement mechanisms. Develop digital systems that bypass traditional banking networks. Connect domestic payment systems across borders. The focus is not on promoting a specific currency. It is on creating a financial architecture that does not depend on Western approval. This matters because infrastructure determines access. In the modern sanctions era, access is power. BRICS are building the ability to operate outside a system they no longer fully trust. The hidden currency war did not begin with BRICS summits or economic forums. It began when Western countries demonstrated that the global financial system could be weaponized. The turning point came in 2022 when the United States and European Union froze roughly $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves following the invasion of Ukraine. This was not a sanction on an individual, a company, or even a government ministry. This was the freezing of sovereign reserves held in Western financial institutions. Money that Russia believed was safely stored and accessible was suddenly locked. For countries watching this, the message was clear. Holding reserves in dollars or euros in accounts at Western central banks or commercial banks means those reserves exist at the discretion of Western governments. If geopolitical tensions escalate, access can be denied. The stability and liquidity that make the dollar attractive as a reserve currency come with political strings attached. But the weaponization of finance did not start in 2022. It has been escalating for 2 decades. After 9/11, the U.S. expanded the use of financial sanctions as a foreign policy tool. Terrorism financing was the initial justification, but the mechanism soon extended to nuclear proliferation, human rights violations, and geopolitical disputes. Countries like Iran, Venezuela, and North Korea face severe restrictions on dollar access. Their ability to trade internationally was crippled, not through military blockades, but through financial exclusion. SWIFT, the messaging system that banks use to communicate payment instructions, became a tool of enforcement. In 2012, Iranian banks were cut off from SWIFT, making it nearly impossible for Iran to conduct international transactions. The technical infrastructure of global finance became an instrument of foreign policy. From the perspective of the United States and Europe, this makes sense. Financial leverage is cheaper and often more effective than military intervention. Sanctions can cripple economies without firing a shot, and because the dollar dominates international finance, the U.S. has enormous power to enforce compliance. Even transactions that don't directly involve American parties often touch dollar clearing at some point, giving U.S. authorities jurisdiction. But from the perspective of countries outside the Western alliance, this creates unacceptable risk. If your country has a territorial dispute, a political system the West disapproves of, or strategic interests that conflict with U.S. priorities, you are vulnerable. And because the global financial system is so centralized and dollar dependent, there is no easy alternative. China, despite being the world's second largest economy and largest trading nation, faces the constant possibility of financial restrictions. If tensions over Taiwan escalate, access to dollar clearing could be restricted. Reserves held in Western institutions could be frozen. Trade could be disrupted not by tariffs, but by payment system exclusion. Russia's experience made this risk tangible. If the West can freeze $300 billion in reserves held by a major energy exporter and permanent UN Security Council member, no country is safe from similar treatment. The precedent was set. The weapon was demonstrated. This is why BRICS pivoted from talking about currency alternatives to building infrastructure alternatives. Holding reserves in yuan instead of dollars does not solve the problem if payments still route through Western-controlled systems. The issue is not the denomination of the currency. It is the control of the rails. The hidden currency war is a defensive response to the weaponization of the existing system. BRICS are not trying to conquer global finance. They are trying to ensure they cannot be locked out of it. The BRICS infrastructure strategy operates in layers, each designed to reduce dependence on different parts of the dollar system. The foundation is local currency trade settlement. Instead of invoicing trade in dollars and converting currencies through dollar clearing, BRICS members are expanding bilateral trade settled directly in their own currencies. When China buys oil from Russia, the transaction is invoiced in yuan or rubles and settled directly between Chinese and Russian banks. No dollar conversion, no Western intermediary. This is the most advanced and operational element of the strategy. Russia and China have dramatically increased local currency trade since 2022. India has negotiated rupee-based trade agreements with multiple countries. Brazil is conducting yuan-denominated trade with China. The volume is growing rapidly because the incentives are clear. Avoid currency conversion costs. Avoid dollar clearing risk. Maintain trade even if dollar access is restricted. The second layer is payment system interoperability. BRICS countries are connecting their domestic payment systems so transactions can move directly across borders without routing through SWIFT or correspondent banks. Russia's SPFS, China's CIPS, India's UPI, and Brazil's PIX are domestic payment networks that handle trillions in transactions annually within their own borders. The goal is to link these systems so a payment originating in Mumbai can settle directly in Shanghai or Sao Paulo without touching Western infrastructure. This is more complex than local currency settlement because it requires technical integration, legal agreements, and regulatory coordination. But progress is being made. China and Russia have connected their systems. India is exploring integration with partners in the Middle East and Asia. The vision is a network where BRICS to BRICS payments bypass traditional correspondent banking entirely. The third layer is tokenized settlement and central bank digital currencies. This is the most forward-looking and least operational element, but it is strategically important. CBDCs and tokenized payment systems can settle cross-border transactions in near real time without relying on legacy banking rails. They eliminate the need for intermediary banks, reduce settlement time from days to seconds, and create audit trails that do not depend on Western clearing systems. China is the most advanced in this area with the digital yuan. Russia is developing a digital ruble. The BRICS New Development Bank has explored using blockchain-based settlement for cross-border loans. The idea is that if payments can be settled directly between central banks using digital infrastructure, the entire correspondent banking system becomes optional. This matters for sanctions resilience. Traditional financial sanctions work because they target choke points, freeze accounts at major banks, block access to SWIFT, prohibit dollar clearing. But if payments settle peer-to-peer through encrypted digital systems, those choke points weaken. The technical architecture shifts from centralized clearing to distributed settlement. The fourth layer is local currency financing. Trade settlement is one thing. Financing is another. Much of global trade is financed through dollar-denominated credit. Importers borrow in dollars to pay for goods. Exporters receive dollar-denominated trade finance. This creates dollar demand even for transactions between non-dollar countries. BRICS are addressing this through the New Development Bank and bilateral financing mechanisms. The NDB issues bonds in local currencies and provides loans denominated in yuan, rubles, or other BRICS currencies. The goal is to create a financing ecosystem that operates in parallel to dollar credit markets, reducing the need for borrowers to access dollar funding. Each layer reinforces the others. Local currency settlement reduces the need for dollar clearing. Connected payment systems reduce dependence on SWIFT. Digital currencies reduce reliance on correspondent banks. Local currency financing reduces dependence on dollar credit markets. Together, they form an alternative financial architecture. This is not a replacement for the dollar system. It is an alternative that operates alongside it. BRICS countries still hold dollar reserves, still conduct significant dollar-denominated trade, and still participate in Western-led financial institutions. But they are building the capacity to function without those systems if necessary. The strategy is redundancy, not revolution. The BRICS coalition is not unified in its motivations or its approach. Different members are driving different elements based on their own strategic priorities. Russia is the most aggressive advocate for de-dollarization. This is existential for Moscow. Western sanctions have cut Russia off from much of the global financial system. Hundreds of billions in reserves are frozen. Access to SWIFT is restricted. Dollar clearing is unavailable for many Russian entities. The Russian economy has been forced to adapt, and that adaptation includes building alternatives to Western finance. Russia has led the push for local currency settlement, connected payment systems, and sanctions-resistant infrastructure. It has the strongest incentive because it has the most to lose from continued Western financial exclusion. Russian officials openly frame de-dollarization as a strategic imperative, not just an economic preference. China provides scale, trade gravity, and technological capacity. China is the world's largest trading nation and second largest economy. When China offers to settle trade in yuan, other countries take it seriously because the volume of trade with China is enormous. This gives China the ability to drive currency adoption in ways smaller economies cannot. China also has the technology and financial resources to build alternative infrastructure. The digital yuan is the most advanced CBDC project globally. CIPS, China's cross-border payment system, processes trillions in transactions. Chinese tech companies provide the software and hardware for payment networks across the developing world. China can fund, build, and deploy financial infrastructure at a scale no other BRICS member can match. But China's motivations are more complex than Russia's. China is deeply integrated into the dollar system. It holds over $3 trillion in foreign reserves, much of it in dollars. Chinese companies access dollar credit markets. The Chinese financial system is intertwined with Western institutions. China benefits from the existing system even as it seeks to reduce long-term vulnerability. China's approach is therefore more gradual and strategic. Expand when, use where possible. Build alternative infrastructure incrementally. Maintain participation in Western systems while reducing dependence. The goal is optionality and long-term leverage, not immediate rupture. India and Brazil are more cautious. Both support the idea of a multipolar financial system and greater autonomy from Western-dominated institutions. Both participate in local currency settlement and infrastructure development. But neither wants to fully subordinate itself to Chinese influence, and neither is willing to sacrifice access to Western markets and capital. India, in particular, walks a careful line. It expands rupee trade with partners like Russia and the UAE, but it also maintains deep ties to Western economies and institutions. India's financial strategy is about efficiency and autonomy, not confrontation. It supports payment system interoperability because it reduces costs and improves access for Indian businesses, not because it wants to undermine the dollar. Brazil's position is similar. It supports BRICS financial cooperation and has expanded yuan-denominated trade with China. But Brazil's economy depends heavily on exports to Western markets, and its financial system is integrated with global capital flows. Brazil wants options, not isolation. The expansion of BRICS membership complicates coordination. Countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE have joined or are joining BRICS. Each has different economic structures, geopolitical alignments, and financial priorities. Iran is heavily sanctioned and highly motivated to bypass Western finance. Saudi Arabia is a major dollar user and closely aligned with the U.S. despite strategic hedging. Coordinating policy across this diversity is difficult. This means the BRICS financial strategy is not a unified, centrally planned project. It is a collection of overlapping bilateral and multilateral initiatives driven by different actors with different motivations. Russia pushes hardest. China provides the infrastructure. India and Brazil participate selectively. Newer members add reach, but also complexity. Despite this fragmentation, the direction is consistent. Every BRICS member, to varying degrees, is reducing reliance on Western financial infrastructure and building alternatives. Despite headlines and speculation, there is no near-term plan for a unified BRICS currency. Public statements from BRICS officials consistently emphasize local currency trade, payment infrastructure, and financial cooperation, not a shared currency unit. The confusion comes from the fact that people expect currency competition to look like the euro or the attempt to create special drawing rights at the IMF, a single unit, a shared monetary authority, a replacement reserve currency. That is not what BRICS are doing. Creating a unified currency requires extraordinary political and economic integration. Countries must surrender monetary sovereignty to a central authority. They must align fiscal policies. They must accept a single interest rate and exchange rate for vastly different economies. The euro achieved this after decades of European integration, and even then it created severe tensions when economic conditions diverged. BRICS has no such integration. Member economies are structurally different. China is export-driven and tightly managed. Brazil is commodity-dependent with a floating currency. India is a large domestic market with capital controls. Russia is energy-dependent and sanctions-constrained. There is no political will to surrender sovereignty to a BRICS central bank, and there is no economic logic to locking such different economies into a single currency. The real focus is on systems, not symbols. Local currency settlement does not require a BRICS currency. It requires agreements to invoice and settle trade in existing national currencies. Payment system interoperability does not require a shared unit. It requires technical integration of domestic networks. Digital currencies operate as national CBDCs, not as a single BRICS token. When BRICS officials talk about common currency, they typically mean increasing the use of members' own currencies in trade and settlement, not creating a new unit. The language is often vague or mistranslated, which fuels speculation. But the actual initiatives underway are all focused on infrastructure, not currency creation. This does not mean a BRICS currency is impossible in the distant future. If integration deepens significantly, if geopolitical fractures widen dramatically, or if the dollar system faces a crisis, the calculation could change. But in 2026, the focus is on building the infrastructure that makes financial independence possible. The currency question is secondary. Understanding this distinction is critical. The hidden currency war is not about launching a rival to the dollar as a unit of account. It is about dismantling the monopoly over financial infrastructure that makes the dollar system unavoidable. Western governments and institutions are defending the dollar system on multiple fronts. The official narrative emphasizes that the dollar remains dominant, that reserve patterns change slowly, and that alternatives face structural challenges. This is true. The dollar still accounts for roughly 60% of global reserves, dominates trade invoicing, and is the primary currency for international debt. But privately, Western policymakers recognize that the infrastructure challenge is real. The response has shifted from dismissing de-dollarization efforts to actively countering them. One element is political pressure. Countries that adopt alternative payment systems or expand non-dollar trade face scrutiny. The U.S. uses economic leverage, diplomatic channels, and market access as tools to discourage participation in BRICS financial infrastructure. The message is clear: choosing alternatives has costs. Another element is regulatory enforcement. Cross-border payment systems and digital currencies are increasingly treated as geopolitical issues, not just technical innovations. Compliance requirements are tightened. Regulatory approval is slower. Systems that could facilitate sanctions evasion face heightened scrutiny. The goal is to raise the cost and complexity of building alternatives. The West is also defending the existing infrastructure. SWIFT has improved speed and reduced costs to remain competitive. The U.S. promotes the use of the dollar in bilateral trade agreements. Central banks offer dollar liquidity swaps to reinforce dollar dominance in times of stress. Western financial institutions provide the deepest, most liquid markets for dollar-denominated assets, which remains a powerful advantage. There is also a technology response. Western central banks are developing their own CBDCs and modernizing payment systems. The goal is to maintain the efficiency and functionality advantages that make the dollar system attractive. If BRICS infrastructure becomes faster and cheaper, it undermines the argument for sticking with legacy systems. But the West faces a structural challenge. Defending the dollar system requires keeping it open, liquid, and reliable. But the very act of weaponizing finance through sanctions undermines trust in the system. The more aggressively the U.S. uses financial exclusion as a foreign policy tool, the stronger the incentive for other countries to build alternatives. This creates a policy dilemma: restrict access to maintain leverage or maintain openness to preserve dominance. The U.S. is trying to do both, but the tension is real. Every sanctioned country becomes a case study in why diversification is necessary. Every frozen asset becomes evidence that dollar reserves are vulnerable. The West still holds significant advantages. The dollar system is entrenched. Switching costs are high. Network effects favor incumbents. But the trajectory is clear. BRICS are building alternatives, and the pace is accelerating. The hidden currency war is not about preference. It is about control. Who controls the payment rails determines who can participate in global commerce. Who controls settlement systems determines who can be excluded. Who controls reserve infrastructure determines whose assets are secure. BRICS are not trying to make the dollar irrelevant overnight. They are building the capacity to function if access to the dollar system is denied. This is a defensive strategy driven by the recognition that financial infrastructure is now weaponized. The West is defending a system that has provided enormous strategic advantage for decades. Dollar dominance allows the U.S. to run persistent deficits, borrow cheaply, and enforce foreign policy through financial leverage. Losing that dominance would reduce American power in fundamental ways. But the system's strength is also its vulnerability. Centralization creates choke points. Choke points create targets. And once those choke points are weaponized, they create incentives to bypass them. In 2026, the infrastructure war is accelerating. Local currency settlement is expanding. Payment systems are connecting. Digital currencies are advancing. BRICS membership is growing. The alternative architecture is becoming more functional and more resilient. This does not mean the dollar will collapse or lose its dominance in the near term. It means the world is becoming financially multipolar. The era of a single, unavoidable financial system is ending. The era of parallel systems with optionality is beginning. The hidden currency war will define the structure of global finance for decades, and the outcome will determine who has power in the 21st century. Thanks for watching the Money Timeline.